My son was 3 weeks old when my sister texted me like she still owned the world. Eric and I are coming over tomorrow at 3 to see the baby. Not can I, not is it okay. Just a statement, like my front door was a calendar appointment she could set without asking. I stared at the message while Henry slept against my chest, his tiny breaths warming the collar of my shirt. My body still felt like it belonged to the hospital. Stitches, soreness, the kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones after an emergency C-section. I'd barely figured out how to stand up straight without wincing. And now I was being asked to keep the peace with a man who had spent months circling my family like a vulture. I typed back with one hand. You can come meet your nephew. Eric can't. The reply came so fast it felt like she'd been waiting with her thumb hovering over the screen. Fine, then I'm not coming either. And just like that, she chose him over Henry, over me, over our family, over basic reality. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing. First my mom, then my dad. My mother's voice was soft but sharp, the way it gets when she's trying to sound reasonable while pushing me into a corner. Sweetheart, you're hormonal, you're anxious, you're overreacting. My dad didn't bother with softness. You don't get to control your sister's life. Let him come. Don't start a war. A war. Like I was the one who brought a stranger into Thanksgiving and watched him declare, 5 minutes into lunch, that my 80-year-old grandpa had dementia. Like I was the one who kept changing my name. Like I was the one who showed up at our family business asking about bank accounts and profit margins. I looked down at Henry's face, perfect and unaware, and a cold certainty settled in my stomach. If I let Eric into my home, I wouldn't just be keeping the peace. I'd be handing him the map. And the worst part? I already knew what my family would do if something went wrong. They would still ask me why I didn't just open the door. I'm 26 years old, and until this year, I thought my life was built on the kind of stability you don't notice until it's threatened. I worked a steady job, front office operations at our family business, the kind of place that smelled like paper, printer ink, and the faint sweetness of my grandpa's peppermint candies. I wasn't the loud one in the family. I wasn't the dramatic one. I was the daughter who kept things moving, who remembered birthdays, who checked on Grandpa's prescriptions, who made sure the holiday sign-up sheet didn't turn into World War III. My sister Janet was different. Janet was 28, magnetic in a way that could fill a room, bright laughter, big stories, big feelings. When she was happy, everyone leaned in. When she was angry, everyone scrambled. She had always been the one my parents worried about, talked about, managed. I used to tell myself it was because she needed them more. Now I know something uglier. Sometimes families don't give attention to the child who's hurting the most. Sometimes they give it to the child who makes the most noise. 7 months before Henry was born, Janet met him, Ryan, or at least that was what she called him at first. She came to my kitchen one evening, cheeks flushed like she'd been sprinting through her own excitement. She dropped her phone on the counter like it was proof of a miracle. I met someone, she announced. He's different. That's good, I said carefully, because Janet and different had a history. She grinned. His name's Ryan. 2 weeks later, she said it again. Same grin, same breathless tone, but the name changed like she expected me not to notice. Actually, she corrected, like she was adjusting a minor detail on an outfit, his real name is Eric. I remember pausing with a dish towel in my hands, staring at her like she'd just told me the sky was green. Why did he lie about his name? Janet shrugged. It's not a big deal. It didn't sound like a shrug. It sounded like a door closing. A couple weeks after that, she added a last name, Dawson, like she was building him out of scraps and hoping we'd accept the final version. When I asked again, more gently this time, because I could see her defenses rising, she snapped. You're being judgmental. You don't even know him. And she was right. I didn't know him. But I knew the feeling in my gut. That small, tight twist that always showed up when something was wrong but hadn't revealed itself yet. I knew the look in Janet's eyes when she was already hooked, when logic became an enemy and anyone asking questions became a threat. So I backed off. I was pregnant then. 5 months, swollen feet, heartburn, the kind of exhaustion that comes from building a human while still trying to be everyone's reliable person. I was preparing to host Thanksgiving at my house, telling myself it would be simpler if I controlled the environment. 2 days before the holiday, Janet texted, Eric is coming to Thanksgiving. Not asking, informing. My stomach dropped. I typed back, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know him. And the name thing is weird. She called instantly, voice sharp like glass. You're acting like he's a criminal. I'm acting like a pregnant woman who doesn't want to meet a stranger for the first time at her house, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Janet, please, just not this holiday. She went nuclear. Within minutes, my parents were involved like they'd been waiting for their cue. My mom's texts arrived in a stream. Support your sister. Stop causing drama. She finally found someone who makes her happy. And then my dad, blunt as a hammer, get over yourself. I remember sitting on the edge of my couch, one hand resting on my belly, feeling Henry kick like he sensed my stress. I looked at the messages and felt something shift inside me, something resigned. I gave in. Fine, I told Janet, he can come. And I hated myself for it before the turkey even thawed. Because deep down, I already knew this wasn't going to be a simple holiday introduction. This was going to be the moment the slow nightmare started wearing a friendly face. Thanksgiving arrived, wrapped in the smell of roasted turkey and the quiet tension I couldn't shake, no matter how many times I told myself to breathe. Eric showed up with Janet 15 minutes late, like an entrance was part of the performance. He was tall, well-groomed, wearing a jacket that looked expensive without actually being memorable. His smile was confident in the way that made people relax too quickly, like he already knew they'd like him, and he was just waiting for them to catch up. Great to finally meet you, he said, extending his hand as if we were closing a deal. I shook it. His grip lingered half a second too long. Dinner started normally enough. Small talk, clinking glasses. My grandpa sat at the head of the table, posture straight, eyes sharp, behind his reading glasses. At 80, he still ran the family business with more precision than most people half his age. Eric watched him closely. Not casually, not politely, closely. Then the stories began. He talked about rescuing a famous actress from drowning at a private Malibu beach, about investing in Bitcoin in 2010 and making millions, but choosing to live modestly, about consulting for a major tech company he couldn't name because of an NDA. Each story landed with a practiced rhythm. Pause, grin, shrug, like he'd told them all before and knew exactly when people would laugh. My parents laughed. Janet beamed. I caught my grandpa's eye across the table. He raised one eyebrow just slightly, the same look he used to give me when a salesman overstated his pitch. After dinner, when I thought the worst was over, Eric leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said it. You know, he said conversationally, looking directly at me, your grandpa might be showing early signs of dementia. The room went quiet. I nearly choked on my water. What? I said. Janet nodded along like this was a medical fact instead of a wild accusation. He forgot something I told him yesterday. My grandpa blinked slowly. I forget where I put my keys sometimes, he said calmly. That doesn't make me senile. Eric smiled sympathetically, the way people do when they think they're being gentle. That's exactly how it starts. Something inside me snapped into focus. Because this wasn't concern. This was positioning. Minutes later, Eric was asking questions that had nothing to do with Thanksgiving. So what's the annual revenue like? Do you own the building outright? What kind of profit margins are we talking about? I deflected, changed subjects, passed dishes, but my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. After that day, Eric didn't fade into the background like an awkward boyfriend usually does. He embedded himself. He started showing up at the family business, just to say hi, according to Janet, then to hang out, then to help. My cousins Thomas and Zoe, who worked there full-time, noticed first. He keeps asking about account access, Zoe told me one afternoon, her voice low, like detailed questions. Thomas added, he wants to know who signs what, who has passwords. Then came the camper. My grandpa gave Janet a generous down payment on a fifth-wheel camper she'd dreamed about for years. It was meant to be hers. Eric took it over immediately. He drove it, maintained it, stored it on his friend's property. When his truck broke down and needed $3,000 in repairs, he and Janet cornered my grandpa in his office, hinting heavily. To my grandpa's credit, he didn't budge. But Janet tried something else. She attempted to charge the repairs to the business account. Zoe caught it before it went through. Janet said it was an honest mistake. Then she traded in her 6-month-old SUV, took a massive financial hit, for an old diesel pickup to tow the camper. Then started using the company fuel card to fill Eric's truck, over $500 in 1 month. By then, the unease wasn't just mine. It was spreading, quietly, steadily, through the family like a warning hum. And I knew, with a certainty that made my skin go cold. Eric wasn't just dating my sister. He was studying us. The lunch that changed everything happened on an ordinary Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. No holiday tension, no crowded table, no excuses. Just the three of us, me, Janet, and Eric, sitting at a small cafe near downtown, sunlight cutting across the table in neat rectangles. I remember thinking, maybe I've been too harsh. Maybe pregnancy hormones had sharpened my edges. Maybe this was just Janet's messy phase. 5 minutes in, Eric proved me wrong. He didn't ease into it. He didn't test the water. He looked me straight in the eye and said casually, like he was commenting on the weather, "Your grandpa has dementia." I froze. My fork hovered midair. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. "What did you just say?" I asked. Janet nodded, stirring her coffee like this was a settled fact. "He forgot something I told him yesterday." Eric leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice lowering into something that sounded rehearsed. Early-stage dementia often shows up as selective memory loss. People forget recent conversations but cling to routines. It's very common. I felt heat rush up my neck. "My grandpa runs the business," I said, forcing each word out slowly. "He does the New York Times crossword every morning. He remembers everyone's birthday without reminders." Eric smiled again, soft, patronizing. "That doesn't mean anything." And that's when I understood. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't concern. This was preparation. Before I could respond, Eric shifted gears, like flipping pages in a binder. "So," he said, "how is the business structured exactly?" Janet watched me expectantly. "How much revenue do you generate annually? Who has signing authority? Is there a mortgage on the building, or is it owned outright?" Each question landed heavier than the last. "These aren't appropriate questions," I said, my voice tight. Eric laughed lightly. "I'm just curious. Family business and all." Family. I left that lunch shaking. That night, I called Thomas and Zoe and told them everything. Not dramatically, just facts. They were quiet for a long moment. Then Thomas said, "We've been meaning to talk to you." They told me Eric had been hovering around the office almost daily, asking about banking details, passwords, account access. Zoe said she'd blocked multiple unusual transactions Janet attempted to run through the company account. That was the moment the family stopped pretending. The next week, Eric was banned from the office. My grandpa didn't hesitate. "I never trusted him," he said simply. Janet found out that evening. She showed up at my house unannounced, slamming the door behind her so hard the walls rattled. "You did this," she screamed. "You turned everyone against him." I stayed calm. I was very aware of my pregnant body, of the baby inside me shifting in response to the stress. "I didn't turn anyone against anyone," I said. "His behavior did." She scoffed. "You're obsessed with that dementia comment." "That comment matters," I said. "So does the money. So does the fuel card. So does the office." She refused to hear any of it. That night, my dad called. "You need to stop interfering in Janet's relationship," he said flatly. "I'm protecting our family," I replied. "You're being controlling." My mom followed up with a softer version of the same message. "You're jealous," she said. "She's happy." Happy. 2 weeks later, I gave birth to Henry after a complicated delivery that ended in an emergency C-section. Recovery was brutal. Pain layered on exhaustion, layered on fear. And then came the text. "Eric and I are coming over tomorrow at 3. I said no. Janet said she wasn't coming at all. And my parents, once again, told me I was the problem. I sat on my bed that night, holding my newborn, staring at the darkened doorway, realizing something that hurt more than the surgery ever could. This wasn't about boundaries anymore. This was about safety. And Eric had just been told, clearly, firmly, that he was not welcome, which meant the next move wouldn't be polite. It would be calculated. The days after I told Janet no blurred together in a haze of painkillers, midnight feedings, and the constant low buzz of anxiety that never fully shut off. Henry slept in short, fragile stretches. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way I used to learn shift patterns, counting, listening, making sure nothing broke the silence in the wrong way. Every creak of the house sounded louder at night. Every notification on my phone made my chest tighten. My parents didn't stop calling. At first, I tried to explain, again and again, like if I said it calmly enough, clearly enough, they would finally hear me. "She's welcome to come," I said. "Eric isn't." "That's the same as banning her," my mom replied. "No," I said quietly. "That's her choice." My dad accused me of punishing Janet, of using my newborn as leverage, of being dramatic because I was still emotional from surgery. I stopped answering after that. Not because I didn't have more to say, but because I was exhausted from defending something that should never have needed defending in the first place. I kept replaying moments in my head, searching for where I might have missed something, where I could have intervened sooner. The name changes. The lunch. The way Eric's eyes followed my grandpa around the Thanksgiving table like he was inventory. Did I wait too long? One evening, my husband found me sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at Henry's bassinet with tears sliding silently down my face. "You're doing the right thing," he said, sitting beside me. "You know that, right?" "I know," I whispered, "but knowing doesn't make it easier." A few days later, Zoe called me. Her voice was tight. "Something's wrong," she said. "Janet's been using the company credit card." My stomach dropped. Not a mistake. Not once. Repeated charges. Restaurants, clothing, random expenses that had nothing to do with the business. Over $3,000 in 2 months. When confronted, Janet cried. Said she planned to pay it back. Said Eric was just going through a rough patch. Said it was temporary. 3 days later, $5,000 went missing from the office safe. There was no confusion this time. Security footage showed Janet entering alone after hours. My grandpa filed a police report with hands that shook for the first time I could remember. Janet was fired. I waited for my parents to finally stop defending her. They didn't. They blamed stress. They blamed pressure. They blamed the business for not paying her enough. I felt something harden inside me. This wasn't denial anymore. This was enabling. Janet didn't call me. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask to see Henry. Weeks passed. Then, one afternoon, while I was rocking Henry near the front window, a car pulled into the driveway. Janet stepped out. She looked wrong. Too thin, hair unwashed, dark circles carved deep beneath her eyes. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I just want to see my nephew," she said softly. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She held Henry like he was something precious and fragile. For a moment, just a moment, I thought this might be the crack in the armor. The beginning of her waking up. Then she asked, "Can you lend me $2,000?" The story shifted as she spoke. Tires, transmission, emergency repairs. Finally, the truth slipped out. It was for Eric's truck. I said no. I offered help, real help, without him. A place to stay, support, therapy, anything. Her expression hardened instantly. As she left, she turned back and said, low and cold, "You'll regret not helping family when you needed to." The words stayed with me. A week later, someone broke into my grandpa's house. No forced entry. They took my late grandmother's jewelry and cash from his desk. Janet had a spare key. Around the same time, someone tried to access the business bank accounts using my grandpa's credentials. Then came the texts. An unknown number. Details about my daily routine with Henry. When we walked. When we came home. The last message read, "Be careful with little Henry. Accidents happen when people don't help family." I filed a police report that night. Installed cameras, changed locks, and finally, painfully, accepted the truth I'd been circling for months. This wasn't just about my sister's bad relationship. This was the moment where love, denial, and manipulation had crossed into something dangerous, and I was standing at the center of it, with a newborn in my arms. Once the word threat entered my life, everything rearranged itself around it. My house stopped being just a house. It became a perimeter. I learned the blind spots of our front yard. I memorized the glow pattern of the streetlights outside Henry's nursery window. I started timing our walks. Never the same route, never the same hour, 2 days in a row. My husband installed cameras while I sat on the couch nursing Henry, watching the reflection of our front door in the dark screen of the TV, like it might open on its own. The police took the report seriously enough to document it, but not seriously enough to promise protection. "No direct proof," they said gently. "We'll keep a file." A file. Like danger politely waiting its turn. That was when my parents finally began to crack. My mom called late one night, her voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. "Janet has been asking me questions," she said, "about when you take Henry out, about whether you're alone." My dad admitted something even worse. "She asked to borrow my handgun," he said. "Said she needed protection." I felt my stomach drop. They agreed, finally, to confront her. They met Janet at a restaurant without Eric. I wasn't there, but they told me every word afterward. How they laid out the theft, the break-in, the bank access attempts, the texts. How Janet denied everything at first, then slipped. According to my mom, when pressed about the threatening messages, Janet said, "Eric just wanted to scare her a little. He wasn't going to hurt the baby." The baby. My baby. That was the moment my parents stopped trying to rationalize. They gave Janet a choice. Eric or her family. She chose Eric. What followed felt like a chain reaction. My mom's car was vandalized in her driveway, scratches down both sides like someone wanted her to notice. My cousin Thomas discovered his business email had been hacked, and used to send offensive messages to clients. My grandpa received a letter demanding $10,000 in cash or family secrets would be exposed. The police took more reports. Still no arrests. Still no certainty. I stopped leaving Henry with anyone who wasn't my husband, not even trusted family friends. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I didn't know what Janet might have shared. Every knock on the door made my heart race. Then came the call that made everything worse. My mom called me one morning crying. Janet says Eric hit her. I sat down so hard I nearly missed the chair. What? She called last night, said they fought, said he lost control. My mom offered to pick her up immediately. Janet refused. The next day she claimed she'd exaggerated, said everything was fine. When my mom insisted on seeing her in person, Janet stopped answering calls altogether. And then silence. Weeks passed. No texts, no appearances, no social media that felt real. Just vague posts from Janet's account suggesting she was traveling and finding peace. My dad and uncle filed a missing person report. The police said the same thing again. Not high priority, because she was technically active online, because she was an adult, because there was no body. I lived in a constant state of alertness. Every email from an unknown address made my hands shake. Every car that slowed near our house sent my pulse racing. And then, one afternoon, it arrived. An email. No name, no greeting. Just words. Janet wrote that she was using a public library computer, that she and Eric had fled the state, that he'd beaten her badly after she questioned where their rent money had gone, that she was hiding in a women's shelter under a fake name because she believed he would kill her if he found her. She attached photos. Bruises, handprints, a police report filed in another state. I cried until I couldn't breathe. Not just for what she'd done, but for how completely she'd been consumed. My parents drove to her the next day, met her at a police station, brought her home. With Janet's testimony, the pieces finally locked into place. Eric hadn't just manipulated. He'd committed crimes. Assault, theft, criminal threats. A warrant was issued. 2 months later, he was arrested near the Canadian border with a fake ID. When I heard the news, I didn't feel relief the way I expected. I felt tired. Bone-deep tired. Because even though the danger had a name now, even though it was behind bars, the damage didn't disappear. Janet came home broken, ashamed, quiet. Henry slept peacefully through it all, blissfully unaware of how close chaos had come to his life. And I realized something that scared me almost as much as Eric ever did. The hardest part wasn't stopping the villain. It was surviving what he'd turned my family into before he was gone. Eric's arrest didn't bring the relief I thought it would. It brought silence. The kind that settles after a storm has passed, but left everything soaked, splintered, and unrecognizable. The house was quiet in the way only new parent quiet can be. Henry's soft breathing, the hum of the refrigerator, my own thoughts ricocheting endlessly off the walls. Janet moved back into my parents' house like a ghost. She spoke softly, walked carefully, flinched at sudden sounds. Her once bold energy had collapsed inward, leaving behind someone fragile and unfamiliar. Therapy appointments dotted her calendar. Support group pamphlets stacked on the kitchen counter. She wore long sleeves even when it was warm. I visited once, standing awkwardly in the doorway of my parents' living room, unsure of my role now. She looked at me like she wanted to say 1,000 things, and like she was terrified to say any of them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded, because anything else would have broken us both. But the dark moment didn't come from Janet. It came from me. Late one night, while Henry slept, I sat on the floor of his nursery, back against the crib, replaying the last 7 months like a courtroom exhibit. Every moment I'd doubted myself. Every time I'd caved to pressure. Every "maybe I'm overreacting," I'd whispered to myself to keep the peace. What if I'd been firmer earlier? What if I'd refused Thanksgiving outright? What if I'd pushed harder when the name changes started? What if I'd trusted my instincts instead of trying to be the reasonable one? The guilt crept in quietly, wearing my own voice. If you'd acted sooner, maybe she wouldn't have gotten this deep. If you'd been stronger, maybe he wouldn't have had access. If you'd just let him meet the baby, maybe none of this would have escalated. I hated that voice. Because it sounded logical. Because it sounded like everything my family had trained me to believe growing up. That my job was to smooth things over, to absorb discomfort, to sacrifice boundaries so others wouldn't feel challenged. I thought about the threatening text again. "Be careful with little Henry." My chest tightened. I realized how close I'd come to letting fear, not love, dictate my choices. How easy it would have been to unlock the door just to make the noise stop. That thought terrified me more than Eric ever had. The next morning, I stood in the shower, letting hot water pound against my shoulders, and something finally snapped. Not in panic, but in clarity. I wasn't responsible for Janet's choices. I wasn't responsible for Eric's violence. And I wasn't responsible for my parents' denial. I was responsible for Henry, for his safety, for the kind of world I allowed into his life, for the lesson he would one day learn about boundaries, even if it cost relationships. The darkness lifted just enough for me to see the truth I'd been avoiding. I hadn't failed my sister. I had protected my child. That night, I slept for 4 uninterrupted hours, for the first time since Henry was born. And when I woke up, something inside me felt steadier. Still scarred, still tired, but no longer collapsing under guilt that wasn't mine to carry. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic confrontation or a single life-changing phone call. It came quietly, through paperwork, conversations, and choices that finally aligned with the truth instead of fighting it. 2 weeks after Eric's arrest, the prosecutor contacted my parents. They wanted Janet's full cooperation. She agreed without hesitation. For the first time in months, she stopped defending him, stopped minimizing, stopped rewriting the past. She told them everything: how Eric had manipulated her from the beginning, how he'd isolated her by turning family concern into control, how he'd convinced her that everyone else was jealous or threatened by their relationship. She admitted something that still makes my chest ache when I think about it. I thought if I proved my loyalty, she said, voice barely audible, he would finally love me the way I needed. That sentence changed how I saw her. Not as the reckless sister who betrayed us, but as someone who had been expertly dismantled. Eric had targeted her vulnerabilities, her need to feel chosen, her exhaustion from being compared, managed, and subtly underestimated her entire life. He didn't just steal money, he stole her sense of self. As the legal process moved forward, pieces of the story finally made sense. Eric had used multiple identities before. He'd left a trail of unpaid debts, damaged relationships, and half-finished lives across several states. Janet hadn't been special. She'd been next. The prosecutor was confident. Assault, theft, criminal threats, attempted flight with false identification. Eric would either take a plea deal or face serious time. When Janet told me this over coffee, our first time alone together in nearly a year, I saw something new in her eyes. Resolve. I'm going to testify, she said, even if it means seeing him again. I reached across the table and took her hand. That's brave, I said. For the first time since all of this began, I meant it without hesitation. Around the same time, my parents began reckoning with their own roles, not publicly, not loudly, but in the slow, uncomfortable way that actually changes people. My mom joined a support group for families of domestic violence survivors. My dad apologized, to me. Not a vague, I'm sorry if you felt hurt, but a real one. I should have listened to you, he said. You saw it before we did. That mattered more than I expected. At home, I started to breathe again. The cameras stayed. The routine stayed cautious. But fear no longer ruled every decision. I took Henry on walks without mapping escape routes. I answered my phone without flinching. One evening, as I rocked Henry to sleep, my husband stood in the doorway and said something simple that landed like a revelation. You trusted your instincts, he said. That's what saved us. I looked down at my son, his tiny fingers curled around nothing, his entire future unwritten, and understood that the story I'd been telling myself was wrong. This wasn't a story about family betrayal. It was a story about boundaries becoming strength, about a woman learning that saying no doesn't make her cruel, it makes her safe. About choosing clarity over chaos, even when clarity costs you people you love. The power had shifted, not because I'd fought harder, but because I'd stopped apologizing for protecting what mattered most. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in ripples, quiet, humiliating, unavoidable, each one landing squarely on the people who had tried to bend reality instead of facing it. Eric's name began circulating in places he could no longer control. Court documents don't care about charm. Police reports don't soften language. Evidence doesn't respond to manipulation. When the prosecutor formally announced the charges, there was no ambiguity left. Assault, theft, criminal threats, attempted flight using false identification. The plea deal on the table carried real time. The alternative carried more. Eric's silence was loud. No more burner phones. No more threatening texts. No more whispered pressure. Just a man in custody, stripped of the illusion he'd spent years cultivating. Janet watched it all unfold from the sidelines of her own life, stunned by how quickly the power dynamic reversed once the system stopped entertaining his narrative. She wasn't spared consequences. She never pretended she should be, but the difference was this. She finally stopped protecting him. That alone changed everything. My parents' world shrank in a different way. Friends they'd spoken to for years admitted, carefully, that they'd been uncomfortable with Eric, that they'd noticed inconsistencies, that they'd felt uneasy, but hadn't wanted to say anything when my parents were so insistent on defending Janet's choices. Those conversations hurt, but they also dismantled the last illusion that everyone else had been fine and I was the problem. At the family business, my grandpa implemented strict new controls, two-factor authentication, limited access, regular audits. Janet was no longer involved, not out of punishment, but necessity. Trust, once broken at that level, doesn't regenerate on a timeline. Still, my grandpa visited her every Sunday. He didn't lecture, he didn't interrogate. He brought groceries and sat quietly while she talked, or didn't. That, more than anything, helped her heal. The fallout reached my parents in ways they didn't expect. My mom admitted one evening, voice barely above a whisper, I thought if I supported her hard enough, everything would turn out okay. She had to grieve that belief. My dad struggled with anger, at Eric, at himself, at the fact that his instincts had failed him. It took months before he could say my name without tension when this topic came up. But eventually, something settled. They stopped asking me to compromise. They stopped suggesting reconciliation for the sake of peace. They learned, slowly, that peace built on fear isn't peace at all. As for Janet and me, the fallout was quieter, more fragile. We started with coffee once a week, neutral ground, no pressure, no rehashing unless she brought it up. Sometimes we talked about Henry, his first laugh, the way he scrunched his face when he sneezed. Sometimes we talked about her job at the coffee shop. Sometimes we just sat. Trust didn't come back all at once, but it came back in inches. One afternoon, as she handed Henry a small stuffed animal, she paused at the door. I should have listened to you from the beginning, she said. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say it's okay. I hugged her. Because some lessons don't need punctuation. Eric's preliminary hearing was scheduled. The prosecutor hinted he'd likely accept the plea. Janet dreaded testifying, but she was ready. I won't let him rewrite this, she told me. Not again. And in that moment, I saw my sister, not the version that had been drowning, not the one who had hurt us, but the one who was finally standing on solid ground. The fallout didn't destroy us. It cleared the debris. And what remained, quiet, honest, imperfect, was something real. It's been 6 months since the worst of it ended. Eric is still in jail, waiting on the final resolution of his case. The prosecutor believes he'll take the plea. Men like him usually do once they realize charm doesn't work in a courtroom. Janet is preparing to testify if needed. She's stronger than she knows, and stronger than she ever was while trying to prove her loyalty to someone who thrived on her silence. Henry is thriving. He laughs now. Full, unrestrained belly laughs that feel like a reward for every sleepless night. When I carry him through the house, I no longer scan the windows. I no longer jump at unfamiliar numbers on my phone. Fear doesn't sit in my chest the way it used to. Janet and I are rebuilding. Carefully, slowly, with boundaries that don't need defending anymore. She meets her nephew without conditions, without ultimatums, without anyone standing between us. My parents are different too. They don't push. They don't minimize. They listen. And maybe that's the quiet victory no one talks about. The one that doesn't come with applause or dramatic confrontations. The victory of choosing safety over approval. The victory of trusting your instincts even when everyone tells you you're wrong. The victory of understanding that love doesn't require access. I used to think being a good sister meant staying quiet, being flexible, absorbing discomfort so others wouldn't have to. Now I know better. Being a good mother means saying no when something feels wrong, without apologizing, without explaining, without waiting for permission. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. Boundaries don't destroy families. They reveal which relationships are healthy enough to survive them. Some wounds take years to heal. Some trust never comes back the way it was. But what we've built now, carefully, honestly, is real. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough.